You need to leave. This space isn't for people like you." The words didn't echo, they sliced, clean and deliberate, across the polished marble lobby of the Grand Meridian Hotel at exactly 10:12 a.m., just as sunlight poured through 20-foot glass windows and caught the gold trim like it was meant to impress someone else. Ava Monroe didn't flinch. She stood there in a fitted black t-shirt, dark jeans, and simple leather flats, no designer logos, no jewelry loud enough to speak before she did. That was intentional. It always was. Around her, the air shifted, subtle at first. A receptionist paused mid-keystroke. A bellman slowed his cart. Two guests near the concierge desk exchanged a look that said more than words ever could. Ava had seen that look before. Years ago. Different city. Same tone. Same quiet judgment dressed up as policy. She let her eyes travel slowly across the lobby, not in confusion, but in recognition. This wasn't new. It was rehearsed. The man in front of her, tall, mid-40s, crisp navy suit, name tag reading Gregory Vance, general manager, folded his arms like authority lived in posture alone. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, voice tighter now, louder for the audience forming behind her. "Please leave before we escalate this." Ava tilted her head slightly, studying him the way one studies a problem they've already solved. "Escalate," she repeated softly, not as a question, but as a mirror. Somewhere to her left, a young woman in a blazer, barely out of training, eyes sharp, shifted uncomfortably. She knew something wasn't right. Ava could feel it. You always could. It was never just one person. It was a system breathing through them. A system that decided who belonged before a word was spoken. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Ava Monroe. Gregory stepped closer, lowering his voice like that made it more professional. "We have standards here," he said. "Guests in our premium spaces are expected to present themselves accordingly." There it was. Not race. Not directly. Never directly. Just enough distance to deny it. Just enough clarity to feel it. Ava's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper. Understanding. She reached into her tote and pulled out nothing. No ID. No reservation printout. Nothing to prove herself with. Because she didn't need to. Not yet. "You've already decided who I am," she said calmly. "So anything I show you now won't matter." A faint murmur rippled through the lobby. A man in a grey suit shifted his stance. A woman lifted her phone, unsure if she should record or just watch. Gregory's jaw tightened. Control was slipping, not visibly, but internally. "Last warning," he said, louder now. "Leave. Or I'll have security escort you out." Ava didn't move. Not an inch. She stood like the building had been constructed around her, not the other way around. And in that stillness, something changed. Not in her. In the room. Because silence, when it holds that much certainty, doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like the beginning of something people don't know how to stop. Gregory did not wait for her to respond again. He turned slightly, lifting his hand with a subtle flick of his fingers, the kind that signaled authority without needing volume. "Security to the main lobby," he said, his voice calm but edged with impatience, as if this outcome had already been decided long before Ava walked through those doors. The word settled into the room like a quiet verdict. Ava exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting past him toward the front desk where two receptionists now stood frozen between duty and doubt. One of them, a young man with a neatly pressed uniform, glanced at the reservation screen again, his brows tightening. He saw the name. He knew it was there. But he said nothing. Not yet. That silence spoke louder than anything else. To the right, the young woman in the blazer stepped forward half an inch before stopping herself, her fingers curling against her tablet. She wanted to speak. You could see it in the tension of her shoulders, in the way her eyes moved from Ava to Gregory and back again. But systems do not break because one person hesitates. They break when someone decides hesitation is no longer acceptable. Ava noticed her. Of course she did. She noticed everything. You checked the system, Ava said softly, not looking at Gregory but at the young woman instead. You saw my name. The room tightened. Gregory's head snapped slightly in the direction of the employee, his expression sharpening. Do not engage, he said quickly, cutting the moment before it could grow. Control. Always control. But the damage had already begun. The seed of doubt had been planted, and now it was visible. Guests were no longer just watching. They were listening. A man near the elevators lowered his phone just enough to whisper to his wife, "Something is off here." Another guest, standing with a rolling suitcase, frowned openly. If she is on the list, why are they pushing her out? Ava shifted her weight slightly, the movement small but deliberate. She was not retreating. She was settling in. You are not protecting your standards, she said, her voice steady, measured. You are protecting your assumptions. Gregory let out a short, controlled laugh, the kind that tried to dismiss without addressing. We have procedures for a reason, he replied. And right now, you do not meet them. Ava's eyes met his fully now, unblinking. No, she said. I do not meet your expectations. There was a difference. And everyone in that room felt it. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime behind her, and two uniformed security officers stepped into the lobby, their presence immediate but uncertain. They had been called to act, but not told why. That mattered. Ava turned her head slightly toward them, acknowledging without reacting. Good morning, she said, her tone polite, almost warm. It caught them off guard. People being removed rarely greeted you like that. Gregory stepped forward again, eager now, pressing the moment before it slipped further from his grasp. Escort her out, he instructed, his voice louder, firmer, designed to reclaim authority. But something had shifted. One of the officers hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, his eyes moving from Ava to Gregory, then to the watching crowd. Because now there were witnesses. And witnesses change everything. Ava did not move. She did not argue. She simply stood there, calm, composed, as if time itself had slowed around her. And in that stillness, the question began to spread through the room, quiet but undeniable. Not who she was. But why they were so determined to make her leave. The hesitation from the security officers did not go unnoticed. It lingered in the air like a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Ava saw it immediately. Gregory saw it too, and that was what unsettled him the most. Control was no longer automatic. It had to be forced. Is there a problem? Gregory pressed, his tone sharpening as he looked directly at the taller officer. I gave a clear instruction. The officer straightened slightly, but his eyes drifted back to Ava, studying her not as a threat, but as a contradiction. Calm. Composed. Unafraid. It did not match the situation he had been called into. Sir, the officer began carefully, we just need clarification on what policy is being enforced. That word landed heavier than Gregory expected. Policy. It was supposed to protect him. Now it was being questioned. Ava's gaze shifted subtly, not toward Gregory, but toward the officer. That is a fair question, she said evenly. Because I would like to understand that too. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. It carried. It reached the edges of the lobby and settled into the corners where people had stopped pretending not to listen. The young receptionist finally took a breath, his fingers hovering over the keyboard before he spoke, quieter than he intended but loud enough to matter. Her name is in the system, he said. The words slipped out before fear could stop them. Gregory turned sharply. Excuse me. The receptionist swallowed, but he did not backtrack. The reservation is active. Penthouse suite. Check-in scheduled for today. Silence followed. Not confusion. Not chaos. Just silence. The kind that forces truth to stand alone in the center of the room. Ava did not look surprised. She simply nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. "Thank you," she said softly. Gregory's composure cracked for a fraction of a second, just enough for everyone to see it. Then it hardened again. "That does not change anything," he replied quickly. "Anyone can manipulate a system. We have seen it before." There it was again. Not proof. Not evidence. Just assumption dressed as experience. A woman near the seating area shook her head slowly. "That does not even make sense," she murmured to herself, but loud enough for others to hear. Another guest added, "If the system says she is a guest, why is this still happening?" The questions were no longer internal. They were spoken. And once spoken, they could not be pulled back. Ava let the moment breathe. She did not rush to defend herself. She did not argue. She let the room do what it had not done before. Think. "You see the pattern now," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the faces around her, not seeking approval but acknowledging awareness. "It is not about verification. It never was." Gregory stepped forward again, urgency creeping into his movements. "Enough," he said, louder now, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "We are not turning this into a debate. You are being asked to leave." Ava turned back to him fully, her expression unchanged, but something behind her eyes had shifted. Not anger. Not frustration. Something deeper. Resolution. "No," she said. One word. Clear. Final. It did not echo. It anchored. The officer closest to her shifted his stance again, uncertainty now visible. Because this was no longer a simple removal. This was something else entirely. Something unfolding in real time. Ava reached into her bag slowly this time, not rushed, not defensive. Deliberate. Every movement measured. She pulled out her phone and held it for a second, her thumb hovering over the screen. Not to record. Not to prove. But to begin something else. Gregory watched her closely, suspicion sharpening his tone. "Who are you calling?" Ava met his eyes, steady, unwavering. "The only person in this building who can actually answer your question." And for the first time since this began, Gregory did not respond immediately. Because somewhere beneath the surface of his certainty, doubt had finally found a place to stand. The phone did not ring long. Ava held it to her ear with a stillness that felt intentional, as if even the silence on the line was part of something larger already in motion. Around her, the lobby remained frozen in a fragile balance between authority and uncertainty. No one moved. No one interrupted. Even Gregory, who moments ago had filled the space with commands, now watched with narrowed eyes, trying to calculate something he could no longer fully control. "Carla," Ava said calmly when the line connected, her voice low but clear enough to carry. "Initiate internal protocol. Level 1. There was no hesitation on the other end. "Understood," came the response, crisp and immediate. "Do you want audit access opened?" Ava's gaze remained fixed ahead, not on Gregory, not on the staff, but somewhere beyond them. "Open everything," she replied. "Start with guest verification logs and employee conduct flags for this location." A pause, then. "Already pulling records. You are live." Ava lowered the phone slightly but did not hang up. She let those words sit in the air. Live. The young receptionist's eyes widened as if he suddenly understood something no one had said out loud yet. The young woman in the blazer took a slow step forward, her voice cautious but firm. "What is happening?" she asked, more to Ava than to anyone else. Ava turned her head slightly toward her, not fully, just enough to acknowledge. "Accountability," she said. Gregory scoffed, the sound sharper now, defensive. "You think a phone call changes anything?" he said, forcing a laugh that did not quite land. This is a private property. We decide who stays. Ava's eyes returned to him, steady, unwavering. That is exactly what we are about to clarify. The words were not loud, but they carried weight. Across the lobby, more phones were visible now, not raised high, not dramatic, but present. Witnesses again. Always witnesses. One of the security officers shifted his stance, lowering his hands slightly as if recognizing that whatever this was, it was no longer his role to enforce it. The other glanced toward the front desk, where the system screen still displayed Ava's name, unchallenged, undeniable. Sir, the first officer said carefully to Gregory, if her reservation is valid, we may need to reassess. No, Gregory cut in quickly, his voice rising just enough to reveal the strain beneath it. We are not reassessing anything. This is clearly a situation of manipulation. Ava tilted her head slightly, almost curious. Then you should welcome the audit, she said. If everything is correct, it will confirm your decision. That was the problem. Gregory knew it. Everyone felt it. Because certainty does not resist verification. Only assumption does. The young receptionist took another breath, this time stronger. There are notes, he said, his voice steadier now. Previous complaints. Same type of situation. Gregory turned sharply again. That is enough, he snapped. But the room had already shifted too far. The pattern was no longer hidden. It was forming in real time. Ava listened without interrupting, her expression calm, but inside, something deeper was moving. Not anger. Not even frustration. Recognition. Because this was not the first time. It never was. For a brief moment, the lobby faded in her mind, replaced by another space years earlier. Smaller. Less polished. She stood at a different front desk, younger, holding a confirmation number that meant nothing to the person behind the counter. The same pause. The same look. The same quiet dismissal disguised as procedure. She remembered standing there, explaining, waiting, hoping logic would matter. It did not. Back then, she left. This time, she did not. The memory passed as quickly as it came, but it left something behind. Stillness, sharpened into purpose. Ava lifted the phone again. Carla, she said, her tone unchanged, expand the audit. I want a full record of guest complaints over the past 12 months. Filter by language used and escalation outcomes. Already in progress, Carla replied. You may want to hear this. There is a pattern. Ava's eyes never left Gregory. I already know, she said quietly. And for the first time since this began, the room was no longer waiting to see if she belonged. It was waiting to see what she would do next. The shift in the room was no longer subtle. It was visible now, like a current running beneath the surface that everyone could feel but no one could stop. Ava stood at the center of it, unmoved, her presence no longer being questioned but studied. Gregory felt it slipping, piece by piece, and his voice came sharper, louder, trying to reclaim ground that was already gone. This is over, he said, stepping forward with forced authority. You have disrupted this space long enough. Security, remove her now. But the command did not land the way it had before. It hung there, unanswered. One of the officers glanced at the other, then back at Ava, then at the growing number of eyes watching them. This was no longer a simple situation. It had become something public, something documented, something that would not disappear once it was done. Sir, the officer said again, more firmly this time, we need confirmation before taking action. Gregory's jaw tightened. You have confirmation, he snapped. I am giving it to you. Ava spoke before the officer could respond, her tone calm, steady, cutting through the tension without raising in volume. That is not confirmation, she said. That is assumption backed by authority. Those are not the same thing. The words settled heavily. Even those who had said nothing until now felt the truth in them. Near the seating area, a middle-aged man in a business Suit stepped forward slightly, his voice measured but clear. "She is right," he said. "If there is an active reservation and no violation, there is no basis to remove her." Gregory turned toward him, irritation flashing across his face. "Sir, this does not concern you." The man did not step back. "It concerns anyone who expects to be treated fairly in a place like this." That was the moment it shifted fully. Not just observation. Participation. The room was no longer passive. Ava did not look at the man, but she heard him. She registered every shift, every voice, every small act of resistance forming around her. This was how systems cracked. Not all at once, but piece by piece, when people stopped pretending they did not see. The young woman in the blazer finally stepped forward fully now, no longer hesitating. "I have seen this before," she said, her voice trembling at first, then steadying. "Guests being questioned based on how they look, not what is in the system. Complaints get logged, but nothing changes." Gregory turned on her quickly. "You are out of line." She shook her head. "No. This is the line. And we keep crossing it." Silence followed again, but this time it was different. It was not tension. It was realization. Ava lifted the phone slightly again, listening as Carla's voice came through with quiet precision. "We have confirmation," Carla said. "Multiple complaints flagged under this location. Language patterns match what is being used right now. Escalations were dismissed without review." Ava closed her eyes for a brief second, not in exhaustion, but in acknowledgement. Then she opened them again, sharper now. Focused. "Send it through," she said. "All of it." Gregory laughed again, but this time there was no confidence in it. "You think this proves anything?" he said. "You are still just a guest causing a disruption." Ava looked at him fully now, and for the first time, there was something different in her expression. Not anger. Not frustration. Finality. "No," she said quietly. "I am the result of everything you ignored." The words did not need explanation. They carried their own weight. Around them, the room had fully turned. Not in chaos. Not in noise. But in alignment. People were no longer asking if something was wrong. They knew it was. And now, they were waiting for what came next. Because whatever this was, it was no longer about whether Ava belonged in that hotel. It was about whether the hotel deserved to keep operating the way it had. The word settled into the room like a final line drawn in ink. No one spoke immediately. No one rushed to fill the silence. Because now, it was no longer about uncertainty. It was about consequence. Ava stood exactly where she had been from the beginning, but the space around her had changed. The distance between her and everyone else was gone. The room had closed in, not to isolate her, but to witness what came next. Gregory felt it more than anyone. The shift. The loss of control. It showed in the way his posture stiffened, in the way his eyes moved too quickly now, searching for something that would restore the order he thought he had. "This is getting out of hand," he said, his voice tighter, no longer smooth. "You are turning this into something it is not." Ava did not respond right away. She let that sentence exist on its own, let it echo against everything that had already been revealed. Then she spoke, calm as ever. "No," she said. "I am showing it exactly what it is." Across the lobby, a quiet agreement passed between strangers. Subtle nods. Folded arms loosening. People who had come in for check-ins and meetings now stood still, invested, aware that they were watching something real unfold in real time. The young woman in the blazer took another step closer to Ava, no longer standing at the edge. "There are internal reports," she said, her voice steady now. "I have seen them. Complaints that never made it past management. Patterns that were ignored." Gregory turned sharply toward her again, but this time there was hesitation in his reaction. Because now, she was not alone. You are making assumptions based on incomplete information, he said, but the conviction was gone. It sounded rehearsed. Ava lifted her phone slightly as Carla's voice returned, precise and controlled. The files have been verified, Carla said. Multiple incidents. Similar language. Same decision patterns. All tied to this management chain. Ava nodded once, her eyes never leaving Gregory. Send it to corporate oversight, she said. Full visibility. A pause, then Carla replied, already done. That was the moment it broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, like something that had been holding too much weight for too long finally giving way. One of the security officers stepped back, lowering his hands completely now. We are not removing her, he said, his voice firm, no longer uncertain. There is no basis for it. The second officer nodded in agreement, stepping to the side. Gregory stared at them, disbelief flickering across his face. You do not get to decide that, he said, but it no longer sounded like authority. It sounded like resistance. Ava watched him carefully, not with anger, but with clarity. That is the problem, she said softly. You thought you were the final decision. The words landed deeper than anything before. Because they were not an accusation. They were a conclusion. A man near the front desk spoke up again, louder this time. This should have never happened, he said. Not here. Not anywhere. Others nodded. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough to make it clear that the room had already chosen its side. Ava took a small step forward now, not toward Gregory, but into the center of the space that had once pushed her out. Her presence filled it differently now. Not as someone being questioned, but as someone revealing. You built a system that filters people before it verifies them, she said, her voice steady, carrying without force. And then you called it policy. Gregory opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because there was nothing left to defend. Ava's phone remained in her hand, the line still open, the system already moving beyond that room, beyond that moment. What had started as a single interaction had become something much larger. And everyone in that lobby could feel it. The shift was complete. The question was no longer whether Ava belonged there. The question now was how long this system had been allowed to operate without being challenged. And for the first time, the answer was finally about to be exposed. Gregory's silence stretched longer than anyone expected. It was no longer the silence of control. It was the silence of someone realizing that the ground beneath him was no longer stable. Ava did not rush to fill it. She let it exist, let it grow, let it force everyone in the room to sit with what had just been exposed. Then, slowly, she moved. Not away. Not back. Forward. One step. Measured. Intentional. The kind of step that signals not escalation, but conclusion. Carla, she said into the phone, her voice calm but now carrying a sharper edge, bring executive access online. There was no delay. Access granted, Carla replied. You are fully authorized. Ava nodded slightly, then lowered the phone just enough to hold it at her side, still connected, still live. She turned her attention back to Gregory, her gaze steady, unwavering. You said this is your property, she began, her tone even. You said you decide who stays. Gregory tried to recover, straightening his posture, pulling at what little authority he believed he still held. That is correct, he said, though the confidence was thinner now, stretched. Ava studied him for a brief moment, then spoke again. Then let us correct that. The words were quiet. But they landed like a shift in gravity. Around them, the lobby held its breath. The young receptionist stepped back slightly, as if instinctively making space for something he did not fully understand yet. The woman in the blazer stood still, eyes locked on Ava, no longer uncertain, only waiting. Ava lifted her phone again, tapping once. A soft tone confirmed the action. Carla, she said, initiate leadership confirmation. Confirmed, Carla responded immediately. Displaying credentials now. The front desk monitor flickered. It was subtle at first, just a refresh of the system. Then the profile expanded. Not just a reservation. Not just a guest file. Something deeper. Administrative. Ownership level. The receptionist's eyes widened as he read it, his voice barely above a whisper. Executive owner access, he said, almost to himself. The words rippled outward. Not loudly. But enough. Gregory's expression shifted again, this time unmistakably. Confusion. Then disbelief. That is not possible, he said quickly, shaking his head. Systems can be manipulated. Ava did not respond immediately. She let him speak. Let him reveal exactly where he stood. Then she took another small step forward, closing the distance just enough that there was no space left for denial to hide. You keep saying that, she said quietly. Because it is the only explanation that protects you. Gregory opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Because now, the system itself was no longer on his side. The young receptionist looked up, this time louder, clearer. The account is not just active, he said. It is primary. Ownership designation. Full. Control. The words landed heavier than anything before. One of the security officers exhaled slowly, almost under his breath. The other straightened, his stance shifting from uncertainty to understanding. The room did not erupt. It did not need to. The realization spread quietly, completely. Ava stood in the center of it, unchanged. The same calm presence. The same steady gaze. But now, the context had caught up to her. Gregory took a small step back, almost without realizing it. His voice, when it came, was no longer sharp. It was uncertain. Who are you? He asked. Ava looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity that had been there from the beginning. I already told you, she said. A brief pause. Then, finally, the line that settled everything. My name is Ava Monroe. She let it sit. Let it connect. Let it land. And this is not your property, she continued, her voice steady, unwavering. It is mine. The words did not echo. They did not need to. Because in that moment, everything that had been questioned, dismissed, and denied aligned into a single undeniable truth. And for the first time since she walked into that lobby, no one looked at Ava and wondered if she belonged. They knew exactly who she was. The words did not need repetition. They settled into every corner of the lobby, into every glance, every breath, every quiet realization unfolding in real time. Gregory stood there, no longer commanding the space but caught inside it, his authority stripped not by force, but by truth. Ava did not move immediately after speaking. She did not need to. The shift had already happened. It was complete. Around them, the room adjusted, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The young receptionist stepped back from the desk as if instinctively recognizing that the system he had been looking at was no longer just data. It was proof. The woman in the blazer lowered her shoulders slightly, the tension leaving her posture, replaced by something steadier. Validation. One of the security officers gave a small nod, not to Gregory, but to Ava, acknowledging what had just been made clear. Gregory tried to recover, but the words came slower now, fragmented. If that were true, he said, his voice no longer sharp, there would have been prior notice. There would have been. Ava lifted her hand. Slightly, not to silence him, but to pause the illusion. There was, she said calmly. You just never expected it to look like me. The sentence landed deeper than anything before. It was not just about this moment. It reached back, pulling every earlier assumption into the light. Gregory's expression faltered again, his certainty unraveling piece by piece. Ava turned slightly, her gaze sweeping across the lobby, taking in the faces that had watched this unfold from the beginning. You saw it, she said, not accusing, not confrontational, but clear. How quickly the decision was made. Before verification. Before conversation. Before truth. No one argued. No one interrupted. Because everyone had seen it. And now, they understood it. Ava's voice softened slightly, but the weight behind it did not change. This is not about a mistake, she continued. Mistakes are corrected when they are recognized. This continued because it was accepted. The young woman in the blazer nodded slowly, almost to herself, as if finally hearing something she had felt but never fully named. The middle-aged man near the seating area crossed his arms, his expression no longer uncertain but firm. The room was no longer observing. It was aligned. Ava lifted her phone again. Carla, she said, her tone steady, initiate full review of management conduct for this location. Effective immediately. Already in motion, Carla replied. Preliminary actions ready upon your confirmation. Ava did not hesitate. Proceed. The word was quiet. Final. Gregory's posture shifted again, this time not in authority, but in realization. You cannot make that decision on the spot, he said, though even he could hear the weakness in it. Ava looked at him directly, her expression unchanged. I already have, she said. Another silence followed, but this one felt different. It was no longer heavy. It was clear. Defined. The kind of silence that comes after something has been settled. Ava took one final step forward, standing fully in the space that had once been denied to her. The problem was never that you did not know who I was, she said, her voice calm, steady, carrying without effort. The problem is how you treated me when you thought I did not matter. The words did not need emphasis. They carried their own gravity. And in that moment, the story was no longer about identity being revealed. It was about a system being exposed. Completely. Irreversibly. And everyone in that lobby knew they had just witnessed the exact moment it could no longer continue the way it had before. The decision did not echo through the lobby with noise. It moved through it with precision. Like a system recalibrating in real time. Ava lowered her phone slightly, her posture unchanged, her presence steady as ever, but now there was something else in the air around her. Authority, not claimed, not announced, but recognized. Carla's voice returned, sharper now, carrying the weight of execution rather than preparation. Actions have been initiated, she said. Management access is being reviewed. Temporary restrictions are in place pending final confirmation. Gregory's badge, clipped neatly to his suit, gave a soft electronic tone. It was subtle. Easy to miss. But he felt it. His hand moved instinctively to his chest, his fingers brushing against it as if trying to understand what had just happened without being told. What did you do? He asked, his voice no longer controlled, no longer measured. Ava met his gaze, calm, unwavering. I did not do anything, she said. I allowed the system to respond. That distinction mattered. And now, everyone in the room understood it. The young receptionist looked back at the monitor, his eyes scanning quickly, then widening again. Access level changed, he said, louder this time, no longer afraid to be heard. Manager privileges, suspended. A ripple moved through the lobby. Not loud. Not chaotic. But undeniable. The middle-aged man near the seating area let out a slow breath, shaking his head slightly. That was fast, he murmured. The woman with the phone lowered it halfway, her expression no longer uncertain but fixed, witnessing something rare. Real-time accountability. Gregory stepped back again, this time fully aware of it. This is not how this works, he said, but the words lacked foundation now. Ava tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful, almost reflective. It is exactly how it works, she replied. You just have never been on this side of it before. Silence followed again, but it no longer carried tension. It carried clarity. Ava turned slightly, addressing the space rather than any one person. When systems are built correctly, they do not rely on personalities, she said. They rely on records. On patterns. On truth. The young woman in the blazer nodded slowly, her voice steady when she spoke. And this has been happening more than once, she said. It was not a question. Ava glanced at her briefly, then back toward the room. Yes, she said. And it continued because no one with authority chose to stop it. Gregory exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair, the composure he once held now visibly gone. You are making this into something bigger than it is, he said, but even he did not believe it anymore. Ava looked at him directly, her gaze unwavering. No, she said. It was always this big. You just kept it small enough to ignore. The words settled deeply. Because they did not just describe what had happened. They explained why it had been allowed to continue. Carla's voice returned once more, precise, final. Final confirmation ready, she said. Awaiting your authorization. Ava did not hesitate. Proceed, she said. Another soft tone followed. Then another. Subtle signals. System responses. Gregory's badge dimmed slightly, its status light shifting color. Permanent now. Not temporary. Not pending. Final. The receptionist stepped back again, almost instinctively. Access revoked, he said quietly. The room did not react with shock. It reacted with understanding. Because this was not sudden. It was overdue. Ava stood there, unchanged, her voice calm as she spoke again. This is what accountability looks like, she said. It does not need volume. It does not need force. It just needs truth to be acknowledged. Around her, the room remained still, but no longer uncertain. No longer divided. The shift was complete. Not just in power, but in awareness. And in that moment, what had started as a single act of dismissal had become something far more significant. Not just a correction, but a reset. And everyone in that lobby knew they had just witnessed the exact moment it happened. The soft tone of the system confirmation faded, but its impact did not. It lingered in the room, settling into every corner like something irreversible. Gregory stood still, his hand slowly dropping from his badge as if he no longer recognized what it represented. The authority he had relied on was gone, not taken by force, but removed by the very structure he believed would always support him. Ava watched him for a moment, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with clarity. This was never about him alone. It never was. Carla, she said calmly, lifting the phone slightly again. Continue with secondary review. I want staff training records, escalation protocols, and compliance gaps identified. Already compiling, Carla responded. Preliminary indicators show systemic failure in enforcement, not policy design. Ava nodded once. That was exactly what she expected. The system itself was not broken. The way it had been applied was. Around her, the staff remained still, but their posture had changed. The young receptionist no longer looked uncertain. He looked alert. Aware. The woman in the blazer stood taller now, her voice quiet but steady when she spoke. What happens next? She asked. It was not fear in her voice. It was readiness. Ava turned slightly toward her, acknowledging the question. Now the system gets corrected, she said. Not just here. Everywhere it has been allowed to operate like this. The words carried weight beyond the room. Gregory let out a breath, slower this time, his voice lower, stripped of its earlier edge. You are overreacting, he said, but even he could hear the emptiness in it. Ava looked at him directly, her expression unchanged. No, she said. I am responding proportionally to what has been ignored. That distinction settled deeper than anything else. Because it reframed everything that had just happened. This was not escalation. This was alignment. The middle-aged man near the seating area nodded once, almost instinctively. That is how it should work, he said quietly. If something is wrong, it gets fixed. Ava glanced toward him briefly, then back to the room. It only gets fixed when someone decides it matters, she replied. The statement hung in the air, simple but undeniable. Carla's voice returned again, precise as ever. Full report has been forwarded to corporate oversight and legal compliance, she said. Recommendations include immediate restructuring of management oversight for this location. Ava did not hesitate. Approve it, she said. A soft confirmation followed. Another quiet shift. Not visible. But real. The woman in the blazer exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she had been holding for longer than this moment. So it was not just me, she said, almost to herself. Ava met her gaze briefly. It never is, she said. Gregory looked around the lobby, at the guests, at the staff, at the space that had once responded to him without question. Now, it did not respond at all. Not to him. Because the authority he had used was never truly his. It had always been conditional. Ava took a final step forward, standing fully at the center of the room, not as someone reclaiming space, but as someone redefining it. This is what accountability looks like when it is real, she said, her voice calm, steady, carrying without force. It does not protect comfort. It protects truth. No one interrupted. No one challenged it. Because by now, there was nothing left to question. The system had responded. The pattern had been exposed. And the outcome had already begun. Ava lowered her phone, the call still connected, the process still moving beyond what anyone in that lobby could see. Then she added one final sentence, quiet but definitive. And this time, it does not stop here. The room did not return to normal. It transformed. Not suddenly, not loudly, but with a quiet clarity that replaced everything that had come before. Ava remained at the center of it, her posture relaxed, her presence no longer questioned but understood. Around her, the staff began to move again, but differently now. Not out of routine. Out of awareness. The young receptionist straightened his uniform, his hands no longer hesitant as they returned to the keyboard. The system in front of him no longer felt like something to hide behind. It felt like something to uphold. The woman in the blazer stepped closer to the desk, her voice calm, composed. "What do you need from us?" she asked. It was not submission. It was alignment. Ava turned slightly toward her, acknowledging the shift. "Start with transparency," she said. "Every guest interaction gets documented accurately. No filtering. No interpretation. Just facts." The woman nodded immediately. Understood. There was no hesitation this time. Across the lobby, guests who had been standing still began to move again, but their expressions had changed. A man adjusted his jacket, glancing once more toward Ava with a look that was no longer curiosity, but respect. A woman near the entrance lowered her phone completely, her face thoughtful, as if she had just witnessed something she would not forget. Gregory remained where he was, but the space around him had shifted completely. He was no longer the center of authority. He was a part of the outcome. He looked at Ava again, searching for something to say, something to regain footing. "This did not have to go this far," he said finally, his voice quieter now. Ava met his gaze, her expression steady. "It did," she replied. "Because it went this far before. Just without consequence." The word settled deeply, not as a challenge, but as truth. Carla's voice came through once more, steady and precise. "Oversight team has acknowledged the report," she said. "They are initiating a broader review across all locations with similar patterns." Ava nodded slightly. That was the real outcome. Not just this lobby. Not just this moment. Something larger had already begun. The young receptionist glanced up again, this time with a small but noticeable shift in confidence. "System logs are being updated in real time," he said. "Everything is visible now." Ava allowed a brief pause, letting that statement settle. Visible. That was always the difference. What is hidden continues. What is seen changes. The woman in the blazer took a small breath, then spoke again, quieter this time. I almost did not say anything, she admitted. Ava looked at her, not with judgment, but with understanding. You did, she said. That is what matters. The simplicity of it carried weight. Because change does not begin with certainty. It begins with a decision. Gregory lowered his gaze slightly, the realization fully settled now. Not just about what had happened, but about how long it had been allowed to happen. Ava turned back toward the room, her voice calm, steady, final. This place does not change because I walked in, she said. It changes because now it cannot pretend anymore. No one responded. No one needed to. Because everyone understood exactly what she meant. Ava adjusted her stance slightly, no longer holding the space, but restoring it. From this point forward, she continued, this hotel operates on truth, not assumption. The words did not sound like a command. They sounded like a standard. And standards, when enforced, do not need to be repeated. The room settled into a new rhythm. Not the old one. Not the one built on quiet judgments and unchecked patterns. Something different. Something clearer. And as Ava stood there, no longer being evaluated, no longer being challenged, but simply present, it became undeniable that what had happened in that lobby was not just a correction. It was a turning point. One that would not be undone. The lobby no longer felt like a place where something had gone wrong. It felt like a place where something had been corrected. The tension that once filled the air had dissolved, replaced by a quiet sense of order that was not forced, but restored. Ava stood calmly, no longer at the center of conflict, but at the center of clarity. Around her, the staff moved with intention, not out of habit, but with awareness that every action now carried weight. The young receptionist worked steadily, his posture confident, his eyes no longer avoiding contact but meeting it. The woman in the blazer had already begun reviewing the system logs, her focus sharp, her voice composed as she coordinated with other staff members. Make sure every flagged interaction is marked, she said. Nothing gets overlooked. There was no hesitation in her tone anymore. She had stepped fully into her role, not defined by fear, but by responsibility. Ava observed quietly, not intervening, not directing every movement. She did not need to. The shift she had initiated was now moving on its own. That was the difference between control and leadership. One forces action. The other creates alignment. Gregory remained off to the side, no longer speaking, no longer directing. His presence had faded into the background of the very space he once dominated. He watched as the system continued to update, as decisions were made without him, as the structure he relied on functioned without his influence. It was not punishment that defined this moment. It was replacement. Carla's voice came through again, steady and precise. Oversight team has completed initial review, she said. Recommendations have been accepted. Interim management will be assigned within the hour. Compliance training will be mandatory across all staff. Ava nodded once. Good, she said simply. There was no need for more. The outcome spoke for itself. A guest near the entrance approached the desk, pausing briefly before speaking. I just want to say, he began, his tone respectful, that was handled the right way. The receptionist nodded politely. Thank you, sir, he replied. We are committed to doing better. It was a simple exchange, but it carried something deeper. Accountability had moved from concept to action. The woman in the blazer glanced toward Ava again, her expression thoughtful. This changes everything, she said quietly. Ava met her gaze briefly. It should, she replied. Otherwise, it means nothing. The words were not harsh. They were honest. And honesty, once introduced, does not leave easily. Ava turned slightly, looking across the lobby one more time. The same marble floors. The same high ceilings. The same polished surfaces. But the atmosphere was different now. Not because the building had changed. Because the people inside it had. Carla, Ava said into the phone, her tone calm, schedule a full systems review across all properties. I want consistency, not exceptions. Already being arranged, Carla responded. Ava lowered the phone again, her role in this moment complete, but the impact still unfolding. She took a slow step forward, then another, moving not as someone leaving, but as someone who had already accomplished what she came to do. As she passed the front desk, the receptionist straightened slightly. "Welcome," he said, his voice clear, respectful. Ava paused for just a fraction of a second, then gave a small nod. Not as approval. As acknowledgement. Because respect, when genuine, does not need to be requested. It shows itself. And as she continued forward, the lobby did not return to what it had been before. It moved forward into something else. Something better. Something accountable. And for the first time, it operated the way it was always meant to. The doors at the far end of the lobby opened slowly as Ava approached, but she did not rush toward them. She moved at the same steady pace she had carried from the moment she walked in, every step measured, every movement grounded in something deeper than reaction. Behind her, the lobby continued to operate, but not the way it had before. Conversations were quieter, more intentional. Staff moved with purpose, not out of routine, but with awareness. The system was no longer invisible. It had been seen. And once seen, it could not return to what it was. Ava paused just a few feet before the exit, not turning back immediately, but listening. Not to voices, not to noise, but to the shift itself. It was there. Subtle, but real. The kind of shift that does not announce itself, but changes everything that follows. She turned then, slowly, her gaze sweeping across the space one final time. The receptionist met her eyes, not with hesitation, but with respect. The woman in the blazer stood straighter, already engaged in the work that would carry this moment forward. Even the guests, now moving again, carried a different energy. Awareness does that. It stays. With you. Ava did not smile. She did not need to. What had been done did not require celebration. It required continuation. Carla, she said quietly into the phone, lifting it once more, make sure the review does not stop at reports. I want implementation tracked. Every change verified. Already in motion, Carla replied. We are building a system that does not allow this pattern to repeat. Ava nodded slightly. That was the point. Not correction for the moment. Prevention for the future. She lowered the phone again, her role in this space complete, but her impact still unfolding far beyond it. As she stepped closer to the doors, a voice came from behind her, careful but clear. Ms. Monroe. Ava turned slightly. It was the young woman in the blazer. There was no fear in her expression now. Only clarity. Thank you, she said. Ava held her gaze for a brief moment, then gave a small nod. Do not thank me, she replied. Continue it. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Because change does not belong to one moment. It belongs to what happens after. The woman nodded, understanding. Not just hearing. Understanding. Ava turned back toward the doors. This time, she did not pause. She walked forward, and as the doors opened, natural light filled the space ahead of her. Outside, the world continued as it always had. Cars moved. People passed. Nothing there knew what had just shifted inside those walls. But that did not make it any less real. Ava stepped out, the doors closing quietly behind her, sealing the moment inside, but not containing it. Because what had happened was no longer confined to a single lobby, a single interaction, or a single decision. It had become something else. A standard. A reminder. A line that, once crossed and corrected, does not disappear. Ava walked forward without looking back, her presence blending into the rhythm of the city, not diminished, not hidden, but steady. Unshaken. Because she had never needed to raise her voice to be heard. She had never needed to prove who she was to be respected. And in the end, she did not just correct a moment. She revealed a truth. One that would remain long after she was gone. You do not need to announce power when it is real. You do not need to demand respect when it is deserved. And you do not need to fight for belonging in a place that was always yours. Ava Monroe did not change who she was that day. She changed what the system could no longer ignore. And that is how real change begins. Not with noise. Not with force. But with truth that refuses to stay hidden.